Welcome, everyone, to the Grandmaster Plan Podcast. This is your premier podcast for high-level Gwent talk, analysis, and everything related to becoming a Grandmaster and what to do after you get there. Today, I am joined by one of my co-hosts, ShoePlays. How's it going today, Shoe?
Joe, man, thank you for asking. It's going good. Welcome, everybody. Just wanted to let you all know that as we are kind of rolling along under the Topdeck umbrella, we are trying some new things out. So for the next few weeks, we're going to be doing a guestless format, and we're going to have Joe, myself, and coming on board is Truedawn, great guy in the Gwent community. Why don't you go ahead and say some words?
Hey, for those who don't know, my name is Truedawn, or Frank, whichever one. And I just produce content for Gwent, play, stream on my channel, and mostly muse about the game's design, good or otherwise, because that's generally been my focus on the evaluation of games. So hope you guys enjoy the show, and I'm excited to lend my takes to the podcast.
Yeah, we're definitely glad to have you on board, man. So it's Truedawn or Frank, but not True Frank. That's definitely a no-no, right? Okay,
not
good,
accurate,
True
yeah.
Frank. Won't be messing around with that.
The real Truedawn. But anyway, boys, we got big news this week. Tons of leaks coming out. The PTR has just dropped for a new patch coming this week. We've got a lot of things to talk about. Why don't we just go ahead and dive right in? The big one. Dwarfs are getting nerfed, boys. I mean, it's finally come. They are getting nerfed. Why don't we just go ahead and run through some of the big ones? We got Ithlane Tremors getting the hammer, coming from the Tremor side, not the Ithlane. That'll be a nice little topic. We got Meditation getting nerfed. We've got the Dwarven Skirmishers now, only boosting instead of strengthening. Mahakam Guards are completely different. A few more one-point nerfs on the Elven Scout and the Dwarven Agitators. The big question is, boys, are Dwarfs playable still, or did they just destroy them?
Why don't you start this one off?
Dwarves are still very much playable. They did not do a whole lot to address the problematic elements of the deck. The biggest thing that was, well, I guess it's debatable which was the biggest problematic thing, but one of the more problematic things was Skirmisher strengthening, so its power compounded alongside Pauly Dahlberg. That was obviously a very big problem. That no longer manifests in the same way because Skirmisher now boosts instead of strengthens. Although Skirmisher is still like just a 13-point card for whatever reason. So like that's a thing. Like it's still there. It just doesn't get the extra 3 when you res it with Poly or whatever. Although it still does get the strength and boosts from Barclay. So if you get one dwarf that got boosted with Barclay, you're playing the same deck and that interaction stays the same. Also, the other problematic thing, Ithlane Tremors. Ithlane Tremors is only 6 to 12 points less, and when it was averaging like 40 plus, that doesn't really make too much of a difference. Like, it was already like egregiously above rate, and now it's only egregiously above rate. So, yeah, it's still going to be a part of the metagame. It probably won't be oppressive or anything, especially if Nilfgaard goes untouched, and it's unclear whether or not that will be the case. But yeah, Dwarves will still be a thing that gets played.
I'm personally really curious to see how the Ithlane with the new Tremors play out. I imagine a lot of people are still going to be trying it, giving it a shot, seeing how it floats. Basically, once everything goes live, because as we know, there are going to be some additional changes that aren't reflected in the PTR right now. The Skirmisher thing is interesting. It's kind of neat that Barclay still has, a strong, powerful effect. It's probably still a bit too good with Pauly, but I do think, they shave some points out of the deck, right? To me, like I said, with the Dwarf deck, I think it's still going to be fine, playable. It's really the Ithlane factor that I think I'm most looking forward to seeing how it plays out. Because like you were saying, there's still a world where this is, high 20s to low 30s of gold, with crazy situations where you're still hitting 40. Those old 60-point Tremors. What are they now? 48-point Tremors. We sort of just have to kind of wait and see how that plays out. What do you think, Shue?
I think it's super interesting that they chose to go with nerfing the Tremors instead of Ithlane. I think a lot of people will argue that the Ithlane is more the problem. I think it's been said, though, that they are planning on changing Ithlane in the future. It's just that right now they haven't had enough time to figure out what they want to do. Am I right about that?
That was the excuse they gave, which I don't find particularly compelling. Like, they were like, yeah, we understand this is problematic, but because we don't want it to be unplayable and we can't figure out another design right now, we're going to leave the problematic card. Which, you could just, like, give it some, like, placeholder design that legislates it out of the game, and then when you have your idea, put your idea in there. You don't want to have a card that you acknowledge to be problematic still present in the game because you couldn't come up with a new idea. That's nonsense.
Right.
Yeah, it seems like they're sort of trying to just curb its power level for the moment and just fight off the particular Tremors interaction, see how it goes. Maybe they want some more data. I don't know, maybe I'm just trying to be an optimist here, but I'm in the camp that Iflin is definitely the problematic card. If you look back at Gwent's history, I think there's a lot of precedent for that, right? It's a card that's been significantly changed over time, and it also just sort of falls into this camp of generically problematic cards, since it almost really breaks one of the rules of Gwent, effectively allowing you to play 2 cards at a time. You sort of see this with DJ, who fluctuates in and out of the meta, but when he's good, DJ is insanely powerful. He's been, 30 to 40 points in even lower power formats where 30 to 40 was much more egregious out of a gold than it is now. So yeah, I think Iflin will have to be addressed at some point in the future. She's sort of the piece that's breaking all of the other tools around her, in my opinion.
Yeah, all of the best cards in Gwent end up being a card that just plays another card. And then when you have something like Ithane that's playing 2 other cards, and giving you points on your side, where Dijkstra is a spy, he's a kind of negative points in that regard. Like, that's just kind of a crazy design card, and they'll definitely have to do something like that in the future, or they will, continue to have these problems every time they print bronze spells that are good. It'll just, make Ithane busted.
Yeah, specifically any bronze spell that scales with whatever, just, like, compounds with Ithilin, which, like, the problem with Ithilin is kind of the environment she's in, because Ithilin scales really well and has a super high ceiling, and that's problematic because no other card does that. But I think that, like, you can make the argument that Ithlin's fine if you just make other cards that do that, although they, granted, should be more conditional. The game would be in a lot better of a spot if there were actually, like, synergies you could get together that would be easy to disrupt, and if they weren't disrupted, the ceiling was super high. So, like, you could have cards that are worth, like, 60 in some cases. You just need to be able to interact with them and have, like, every faction with access to those things.
Yeah, part of the problem also is that the condition for Iflin to be insane isn't something that comes up once in a while, right? Like, in a long round 1, if you have Iflin, you're almost guaranteed to win it. We saw this, I had always thought of it sort of like the way Saskia was back in closed beta, as that's how a lot of the round 1s turned out. Saskia, for those of you who are a little newer to Gwent, used to be a 9-strength dragon unit that damaged all opponent units by 1 and boosted all of your units by 1.
Oh yeah, that was
basically a double Tremors.
Basically a double Tremors without the golem, although I think it had an 8 or 9 strength body. I think that might have varied at certain times, but it's basically the same type of effect. And what it is it's a tool to just solidify a long round, and chances are in the large majority of games there's going to be one gigantic long round. And making that condition so easy to meet to unlock the full potential of something like Ithilin, I don't know. I'm still not a huge fan of it, but I do think it's a change for the better, right? Is it the proper way to attack the problem? I don't know if that's necessarily true. Is it enough? I also don't know if that's necessarily true, but I definitely think it's a step in the right direction.
I like that they are definitely recognizing that these big swing cards are, can be problematic in the game. The reason being is, even if you look at Sky Tall Mirrors, like, a lot of it comes down to, who draws Ithilin and who doesn't, because it's just so powerful, it can force people out of a round, and really the only way you can match its power is with your own Ithilin. So I'm glad that they've kind of been addressing this over the last few patches. There's still some, like, remnants of this around, like a Letho Regis combo where you can get huge swings, but it's good to see that they at least recognize this as being problematic.
Yeah, the biggest thing is you need cards like Ithilin or anything with, like, that big payoff with that big ceiling needs to have some kind of build up. You need to, like, play things that build towards that, like allow your opponent to have a window to disrupt you. But Ithilin, just if you play like a 6-card or 7-card round, he's just going to be good. Dijkstra, you can play whenever, and he's just going to be good. There's no, like, there's no cost you are incurring to play these cards. They just exist and they happen, and there's nothing anyone can do about them. And that's largely the reason why the game has not been especially compelling in recent history.
I think it's important to mark the differences between the two, though. I mean, if you look at Dijkstra compared to Ithlinne, that's -6 points because you're playing 4 points on the other side rather than 2 points on your side. And also, Dijkstra is random, so there is sort of a cost with that.
Kind
you have
of.
to,
you
have
to
thin your deck first, right, if you want them to be consistent.
Yeah, you're paying a real cost in the deck building phase, at least. And you're also a little restricted, as you were saying, like, Dijkstra is random if you're playing him in round 1, right? Dijkstra is a lot less random if you're playing him last card, round 3.
Right. So he takes setup in that regard, at least, that you have to thin, or you at least have to consider what's in your deck if you want him to be safe. Whereas Ithlinne, it's pretty easy to, you know, even if you don't get the setup for that double Tremors, you still have Thunders, and really the only way to brick her is by drawing both spells.
While we're still on the topic of the Scoia'taels and the dwarf nerfs in general, we brought up a few of them. If we all sort of, it seems like, agree that the dwarf deck is going to continue to exist in some capacity, which direction do you guys see it going? More of the Ethne-based type of thing, although Commander's Horn's getting hit a little bit, or do you think it's back to everyone on the Brewer train? I personally never left the Brewer train. I had felt it was superior beforehand, or do you think we're going to see maybe some third incarnation that takes into account more of the changes? Where do you see the archetype going?
I would imagine it like largely remaining the same. I don't really see there's no real incentive to change anything. Nothing's really been added, and the deck is just very focused on what it does. I mean, it's possible that like some innovation comes up, and it's going to just be like light tech stuff, not really anything that changes fundamental functionality.
Yeah, that's a pretty hard question. I think the Ithne or Ethne version is going to be significantly weaker, really just because like Commander's Horn is a lot worse now. I don't think that something like, you know, artifact compression is really necessary, where Consume has kind of been dying down. So we'll see. They still have a lot of powerful silvers though, but I think Brewer might just be better in that regard as well. I think where they kind of suffered is they lost a lot of their removal potential, right? With Ithlinne and even the Yorvith Meditation getting nerfed now. So the only real
let's
thing
talk about that guy for a minute.
Yeah,
go on.
The only thing they have left really is Shiru in that regard. So maybe it'll, you know, turn into kind of a scorching sort of version of dwarfs. But yeah, what do you guys think about Meditation? I mean, I've heard a lot of people say it's unplayable now. Which,
well, like unplayable strong, it's definitely not auto-included anymore. Although, like, the meditation change is like one of the 2 or 3 changes in the patch that I would actually qualify as good.
Yeah.
Like, it makes design sense because there's actually interplay surrounding that card now, and you can like move things in place. There's synergies with existing cards in the faction. That card now asks you to do things in order to get the payoff, which is how all cards like that should be designed. So yeah, that's good. Problem, it's like one of the few cards in the game that functions that way, so it's fighting asymmetric warfare against all the other busted things. So, like, yeah, for competitive, it'll, like, maybe you could, if you're playing a movement archetype, the downside is very limited. You could, like, enable it pretty easily. But outside of that, yeah, it's probably not good enough anymore because of how easily your opponent can play around it.
I mean, I think you just put it better than I was going to put it. I feel exactly the same way. I think it's a really big potential for a payoff card if the movement deck turns out to be, you know, competitively viable. I think it's going to be very, very strong there, but I don't think you can just jam it into to any deck anymore. It already had the slightly small downside of you know, if your opponent sees that you haven't played it, maybe they played theirs round 1 in a mirror situation for like a lot of value, they could bleed you in round 2, not let you get the most potential value out of it. Once in a while, it was 8 to 10 points, something like that. To me, not being able to have its base functionality of fighting the 2 units is, you know, rough. And I think the biggest hit to me is a lot of Bork type of decks. I would usually use Yorvith Meditation to... he was a Dragon Slayer, man. He killed a lot of Borks in my time. And the fact that that functionality is now gone, I really do think that that takes a lot of the power level out of the card. Like, that saved me so many times in the... playing against Reveal Nilfgaard and playing against some of the Henselt decks that were making use of the big gold dragon.
Yeah, that's a good point too. A lot of flexibility lost on him. I think the one good thing that we can say about it is that it's probably easier to balance him how he is now compared to how he was before. Because before he was 2 points and like he was busted, right? He was so good. But now he's 2 points, new ability. He's a little bit on the weak side. You know, you can throw him 2-3 points and see how he turns out that way. So I think in a few patches with some point buffs, we can see him where he's, you know, very playable in some wide ranges. But again, not auto include like he is now.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see a few point buff on him either in the near future. I imagine they'll let him sit the way he is for a while. But in fact, I think that's very likely to happen.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's weird because they're kind of piecemeal fixing cards. So you have some cards like Yorvith Meditation who are like designed the way cards should be designed, and then it's sitting next to Ithlin Tremors, and when you compare the two, it's a joke. So it's hard to like tune one up to the other or down to the other when they're like not designed the same way. One is not asking you to incur a cost to get the benefit, the other is. So, like, yeah, Yorvith is going to show up a little bit, but it's much worse than it previously was.
Yeah, like I think you're saying, it's really hard to compete, and I just want to elaborate on that in case some of the people in the chat or listening to the video don't fully understand. What he's talking about here is game design philosophy, and a lot of the fundamental risk versus reward and a lot of the interesting plays that are based on this kind of stuff have sort of been taken out of the game. And then what he was specifically referencing there, unless I misinterpreted, is that when you try to compare a card that actually has risk associated with it to achieve this awesome reward, and you're comparing it to cards that are just good whenever you slam them down, you have to compare the floor and the ceiling, not, you know, it's not necessarily always just the average value. So it's a hard comparison to make.
It would be like, for anyone familiar with Magic, like if you're playing Standard and you have like your Siege Rhino, your 4-mana 4/5 with its Enter the Battlefield trigger, it's like a good card. And then if you're playing Legacy, where everything costs 0, you're not fighting on the same level. Like, one card requires you to incur a cost like Moxes don't. There's 0, like they just cost nothing. So, like, that's kind of what we have in Gwent, where we have some cards like Ithlin that are just like bonkers nonsense, and then we have Yorvith, who's like, that's how cards should look, but he's one of like 5. So.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the important things that will have to be kind of explored going forward in Gwent is how can we make some sort of cost in the card within its ability? Because we have no mana system, we have no resource system.
I have ideas for
besides cards. So you kind of have to go into the ability and say, okay, in order for this card to be really good, you need this sort of scenario or this sort of setup. And that's kind of a lot of the problems we have nowadays is just like cards like Impair Enforcers, which will be the next big topic, I'm sure. But that card, it's
Segway
like...
game on point.
Yeah. It's supposed to be an engine, right? You're supposed to play it when you have a ton of spies on the board, or set it down and then play some spies, and it gets value that way. But the way it is now is that it can get extreme value very easily, right? It requires very little setup, very little condition, because you're playing those spies anyway, and you can play it from hand into a board full of spies and get the full value. Now, this is something that a lot of, powerful Gwent cards are seeing, where it's very easy to get that value and stuff, or no setup, and they will have to kind of move away from that in order to keep the game interesting. Now, with that being said, Enforcers have been mentioned to be getting changed, but we don't know exactly what is getting changed with that. What do you guys think about this?
I think that it was mentioned that they would get reverted, although I thought the reason they had to change them in the first place is because the way they changed the priority encoding wouldn't support that card working anymore. But just assume for a second it gets reverted. That at minimum makes that card play the way it should outside of the emissary chain, because the whole that bronze base is actually reasonably well built when you consider the fact that you have brigade for the end of the round, or just the proactive play that you can kind of play at any point just to catch back up. But then there is Enforcer that has a higher ceiling because it can actually remove things from your opponent's board, but you have to play early and then play things, and it gets value over time. The way it works right now with its current iteration, there's no wrong point to play it. You can just Brigade and Enforcer now function the same way, where you just can play both later and they get their value immediately, and there's nothing you can do about it. And Enforcer is much worse because at least brigades, strength is on a body you can scorch, and it's tied with other brigades. So they're like, you are like assuming some risk by playing those. Your opponent can respond and remove those points from the board. When you're getting strength via damage, it's much harder to recoup that. Like, it's really only like rezzing or healing, which aren't common. So when you were able to get all of that value from the Enforcer immediately and your opponent can't do anything about it, it's just like way out of line.
Yeah, there's so few cards in the game, like cards like Armorsmith, that actually really punish vomiting out damage onto your opponent's board. And what it effectively is doing there, in its current form anyway, is just locking in the value and saying there's nothing you can do about it. This value has been locked in, and all you can do is, remove this 6 strength body to prevent it from accruing any future value. And like we were just talking about with the risk versus reward, I mean, there's no risk in playing the Enforcers right now. They almost function as, dare I say, a strictly better version of the Brigade. They just have a lot less of the weaknesses. They have more upside. From a strictly numerical standpoint, they're going to represent the exact same amount of value. Theoretically, you could play them at any point in the round, although now it's a little bit better to play them later so that you're not incurring any sort of risk at all, and it's super easy to dance around that risk. That was one of the changes that I know a lot of people have complained about, even since like day one of the patch, and I just tend to agree with them. Originally, I had thought that a large part of that change was due to every faction sort of getting the Panther-like unit, right? The low strength body, or what's the actual good one? The Nilfgaard Viper Witcher.
Yeah.
That's basically just gonna, target these engine pieces, make it pretty easy to get them off the board. So they were trying to give it value that way, and as things have shaped up, it just seems way out of line.
Yeah, I think it's something that kind of just came as consequence of the engine change, whereas I think Truedawn said it was just something where they couldn't make it work the way it was of old, which, just to clarify, old way was you had to play it the spies while the Imperial Enforcer was on board. It didn't retroactively ping for any spies already on the board. I think if they kind of figure out a way to make it work the old style in this meta, then it would be pretty well balanced, right? Because they were very good back then, but that was in a time where bronzes were a lot worse, right? And kind of with the midwinter update, they've been kind of pulled up to that same level pretty much across the board. So personally, I hope that's what they do. I mean, they could be like a 5, like that'd probably be fine too with the old ability. But it's good that they are changing it because it's something that needs to be done. I think we could all agree on that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a strict revert is pretty much just the way to go. That if I'm on the CDPR development team, that's where I start. I see how it plays out for a little while and make adjustments if necessary.
Yeah.
But I just like the old design.
Yeah, the emissary chain is problematic, but you could argue that it really only happens like once a game and not even in every game. So that makes it closer to okay, even though like it's a really insane thing when it happens. It's just 1,000,000 points like for a bronze. But yeah, I would agree that like reverting it is probably the best course of action for now until they think of something better, or if they want to do something better.
I guess while we're on the topic, what do you guys think about kind of the new Letho Regis combo that is kind of, taking the Spies deck by swarm? We see a lot of players on Pro Ladder doing really well with that. Guys like Tailbot and Mago were kind of first to adopt it. And I've even seen it run in like Alchemy decks. So it seems decently popular to me. I mean, do you think that's something that's like healthy for the game, or what do you guys feel about that?
I mean, not really, because what can you do about it? Anything? Is there any interaction point between for Letho and Regis that you can prevent yourself from not getting blown out?
The only way you could really play around it is you force them into a short round and then you play around it with the rows. Since Letho can only lock and consume 2 units on the same row. But that's really the only counterplay.
I mean, I guess ostensibly the counter is not having giant idiots. Like, if you just have several medium dudes, it's a whatever interaction. But the game is currently situated in such a way where you're obligated to, run giant things. So, you could throw Letho back at the enemy with a Cyclops. Yeah, sure, you could do that. Get him. But, I'm pretty much against any, giant play like that your opponent can't at any point interact with, that's just generally bad game design. You need to have some level of interplay when the payoff is that large. So, I mean, for competitive play, yeah, do it while it's here. It's busted, or at least very good. So, yeah, if you're trying to win games, it's great, but it's not something I'd like to see in the game for too much longer.
I don't mind it as much, and that's sort of part of two-pronged reason, although I do think it's good. A, it does require 2 golds, and Nilfgaard's a faction that can see his whole deck, so it will see its combo, I get it. But that is really restricting some of your power in other rounds. Now, obviously, their bronzes are insane and can carry them through, but taking up 2 gold slots, I think, is a very big deal. The other reason I'm not 100% sure is because right now I think it's kind of unfair to evaluate it. All the decks that are, the large majority of the decks that are running this combination right now are also running the Yennefer into another Summoning Circle package. And I think that this big combo 1-2 punch finisher gets significantly worse when you can't guarantee yourself last say and double last say. And that deck right now between Amir, Summoning Circle, Spy, and Yennefer for another Summoning Circle is just the premier card advantage deck. If it wants last say, and oftentimes it can get double last say, there's really nothing you can do to stop it, assuming, you know, relatively equal draws on both sides. So I think I'd like to evaluate that combination in a world without Nilfgaard having a way to throw 4 to 5 spies at you, and I think we'd get a little bit better of a picture of exactly how powerful it is.
Yeah, you are correct that the upcoming change to spies does like curb that deck's power level a lot because of how much it does rely on last word. So
a big thing. Sorry to cut you off. Is the enforcer nerf too? I kind of liken that combo to kind of like, if you guys remember back when open beta kind of first came out, and I think it was one patch after that we had the Skellige meta where Frost was really strong. People were playing Cambi decks in there with Axeman. And I think it's kind of similar to that, right? Where you have this super strong kind of combo finisher. And yeah, that's really powerful, but I think the problem is more, you know, the supporting deck behind it, where the Axemen with the Frost were just busted back in the day. I think now when you have the Spy package with really strong Impera Enforcers, like, you can set up your win condition in a favorable way so easily. And once Enforcers get toned down, I think the deck will see a little bit of a drop-off, and again with the Spy Summoning Circle thing as well. Because with the Enforcers in the Brigade, you can play Spies all day, and you're doing it with like positive tempo sometimes even, just because of your Spy engines.
So there are like a couple things in the game that should not be faction identity, like carryover and Spies among them, and the fact that like Nilfgaard's thing is we don't care about Spies, like, or we don't care about the points on Spies. We can recuperate that. Turns out that breaks the game in half. So hopefully we see that like alleviated a bit.
Are you talking just Silver Spies or Bronze as well?
Yeah, just, well, the synergies with the Bronze Spies make it so their Cantarellas are nonsense. Like, right. They frequently have point neutral or plus point Cantarellas, which are absurd. Like, it's not even like hard to do. It's a common thing.
Yeah. I like the Bronze Spy synergy. I think that's something that's cool and unique. But yeah, the fact that you can play Silver Spies for like, I mean, 0 or plus points even is kind of crazy.
And like that, you could debate that like that should be a thing, but there should be some build up towards that, or like a hefty deck building cost, or like you have to like try to do that, and it like, but in Nilfgaard it's just, my deck's functioning normal. I will Rainfart into Cantarella and gain 4 this turn. Okay, sure.
It might not be as bad now that you only get kind of 1 Spy effect a game, but again, that's to be seen.
Yeah. I was having an interesting conversation with Sir Pumpkin. How much of the power level do you think gets taken away from the Spy archetype if you change emissaries to 3 strength? Now you effectively, to kill them, to res them with medics, you're lowering the damage of your enforcer pings because you have to hit it like 1.5, 1.5. Basically, you're also just giving your opponent more points. Like, is something like that brutal enough to kill an archetype? Or do you think if it still winds up out of control post-patch, that's something they could potentially look at? What do you guys think about that?
That's like a reasonable way to go about it, because I do think that the way the Nilfgaard deck plays is actually like pretty reasonable. There's interaction, you can do short round, long round. There's a lot of play going on with that deck. It's just that its power level has been really high, and it's been inherently more consistent than all the other decks, which has like created a fundamental power gap. So if you like alleviate some of that, give like other decks similar consistency, and tone down the power in line with everything else. I don't think you need to change the play patterns of the deck, and if your aim is to tone on the power, buffing Emissary would be a reasonable way to do that.
Yeah, that's tough to know too. I mean, it seems like such a small change, 1 point, but when you consider that you're playing like 7 or 8 emissaries over the course of a game, like that adds up a lot, and you need more engines now to recuperate those costs. So it's something interesting. I think if you made the emissaries doomed, you'd probably kill it, right? Because now you're getting 3 less emissaries a game from the meta.
Well, that's a big hit.
That erodes the consistency more than anything, which you could debate is a path to go down, although I'd rather see everything else's consistency brought up to Nilfgaard, not Nilfgaard's brought down to everything else.
Right.
But I think that the taking Emissaries 3 actually is pretty good, because it makes it so whenever you, like, if you Emissary into a Brigade or an Enforcer, the Emissary was actually like a cost, and we were -1 as net. So, and like you said, you have to kind of lose value if you want to resurrect them. So that curbs the power level without changing the inherent play patterns in the deck that people enjoy. So that seems like a reasonably elegant way to go about it if you're concerned the deck is too strong.
Also, as far as play pattern stuff, because I find this stuff super interesting. When we were talking before about the whole Regis Letho combination of cards there, there's some potential counterplay, right? Like Vran Warrior, I suppose. Whatever the Eki Mara guy is now, the Barbagazi. So there's some counterplay to it. What type of cards
I would
you
say
think we'd have to see in other factions?
I would say that's not even counterplay, really, because Regis still just drains the boosts from those cards, right?
Oh, yeah, so that doesn't actually work, does it?
Yeah.
It feels bad.
And even in those cases, like, say, for example, those did work, those are very narrow answers from one faction, and that, like, that interaction is so core to that deck's functionality, you're just making it so this faction can answer it, and these don't, and the match is decided before it starts. And, like, we've had that stuff present in formats before, where we have like 95-5 matchups just at like when the game starts, and that's not stuff you really want to encourage. You do want deck building to matter. You want deck building to matter a lot, but when you have like incredibly polarized matchups and like when things centralize around particular cards that only certain factions can answer, that makes stuff really less, like, not compelling at all.
The one way you could kind of create some counters to that combo is with immune cards. Things like Werewolf or Arrakis Queen that can't be targeted, and I think that's kind of a cool gameplay mechanic as well that they introduced with the Werewolf, with the Arrakis Queen. I'd be all up for seeing some more immune cards in maybe other factions like Cursed or something like that. Depends where it's flavorful and where it fits in. But
there's certainly more space you can use for the immune tag. I was like, me and Vishra have been like designing cards for funsies. And one of the ones he came up with was a card that gave everything else immune, so you had to kill it before you killed the other stuff, so it kind of acted as a shield. And like I thought,
flag bearer type of thing. That's really cool.
That was Nithril, right? That you guys. I think I saw him tweet.
Yeah, he came up with that. So like stuff, you can do stuff like that like you have to kill this before you can interact with this stuff. That's like interesting design space. I'm not sure if it's actually good. You have to play around with it, but stuff like that would be interesting to explore.
Yeah. I think there's more room for it, although I will just caution that I think the immune tag is very dangerous in and of itself, so you have to be really, really careful with it. I think this is just my opinion, this is no direct, contact or anything, the Monster Werewolf, I think, is more of a test run by CDPR than anything, to see how it functions, see how it plays, how the play patterns are based around it. I don't think it's any coincidence that we didn't see 7 or 8 of these immune units all come out at one time, and they just threw them all out into the wild. I think this was a controlled release and almost a test.
That's a good way to do it, though, honestly, if you're going to be releasing new mechanics, new cards.
I agree.
Another awkward thing surrounding immune is that most of the common removal does not care about immune. Like, immune does not dodge Scorch, Bork, Igni. Like, there's a lot of things that, like, D-Bomb if it's boosted. Yeah. There's a great deal of things that don't care about being targeted. So I think there's actually room for like different kinds of tags where you would, like, immune can't be targeted, or something else can't be like destroyed, so it would be immune to, like, you can have it so it's resilient to certain types of removal and still vulnerable to others, So if you want to shore up a faction's gap against something, you could like do it that way, or whatever you would deem necessary in those situations. It's just weird that the immune tag is used in a lot of spots on giant things where it doesn't actually do what you want it to. Like, immune on a rocket screen doesn't really matter because you're just like, you would traditionally want to Igni or like get scorch that target anyway, and immune doesn't help that. So
you're saying other variations on that, maybe like reinforced, you know, like some basically can't be scorched, but more elegantly worded,
yeah, you could,
like that.
Like if you're already in the business of making things like immune, and you have cope with the fact that you're okay with things being resilient to certain schools of removal, I think understanding that there are more schools of removal than things that just target is important, and deciding what those go on and why is important. And there's certainly debates to be had around like the specifics of that, but it's weird that our only current removal resilient thing is immune, and it doesn't affect a lot of the things it's supposed to.
What do you guys think would be the most busted card in the game if you put an immune tag on it? It's kind of out of the blue, but
Siri?
That was my first thought as well.
Yeah, Siri's Siri's probably the answer there.
What about Succubus?
And I kind of think, actually, there's a debate to be had that Siri should have the immune tag, because that card's interaction is centralized around
Sign me up.
Keeping points, like not falling too far behind. Like, you play around that card by like staying with your opponent, not by like killing it. I think the fact that you can kill it by like a million different things has made it like largely unplayable and uninteresting.
The thing is, when Siri's good, she's like the best card in the game. Is the
correct?
counter-argument to that, right?
That is correct, but I enjoyed playing with it.
Yes, it's this card that changes the way your opponent's going to play more than anything in the game. I think it induces the most mistakes out of an opponent than any other card in the game, because it fundamentally changes what's important about the round as soon as it hits the table. You're now playing this sort of different psychological game, just completely based around the Siri. And I mean, I like that if you're going to have a card like that, it is Siri. It's one of the main characters in the series. You know, it's not some random, I don't know, monster idiot.
Yeah.
Like,
it's also worth noting, like, importantly with Siri, the benefit you are supposed to get for going first is that you are ahead. Like, you'll get points on the board first. You can stay ahead of your opponent. Siri is like the only card in the game that pays you off for doing that. So you can actually like play your giant tempo thing when you go first, and like try and stay ahead, and then play Siri and actually flip the coin flip, because your opponent was doing their, oh, I'm on the draw, I can just like play whatever, it doesn't matter, and then you play Siri and punish them for it. And it's like the only card that allows that play pattern. So I actually think that that's a cool thing that also helps alleviate the coin flip problem. I mean, you don't want a neutral card being run in every deck, so like that's a separate issue. But you should have things with that play pattern that like, I got far enough ahead, I can now punish my opponent for that.
Chad is saying Okfist, and I just love that idea.
Oh,
it just sounds incredible, because Okfist isn't just slam it down and it works. Okfist, you know, you have the timer, you have to work with it, you have to plan around it.
Yeah.
I don't know how particularly healthy it would be right out the gates if you just slap the tag on there, but it would definitely be cool.
I think if you put immune tag on Siri or Okfist, they'd be pretty broken pretty quick. I think if you really want to buff those cards, just give them some more armor, see how they do with that, and then we could maybe talk about immune tag. But yeah, good answers to the question. What if you put an immune tag on like Suck or Villain Trentmirth or something like that? Succubus, that is.
Succubus is probably
pretty
insane.
busted, right?
Succubus's ceiling is too high to be on Interact.
Oh.
Yeah.
Like, you're talking about, you know, I mean, the ceiling is, you know, quote-unquote infinite or whatever, but it's not absurd to think you could average 40-plus points with Succubus, like, on average. I mean, what do you have to be hitting, an 18 at that point? You can find stuff like that in pretty much every deck. Even Dwarves are getting up to 15s, a little higher with Commander's Horns if you're against Skellige. Like, what's the Skellige Marauder deck going to do against that?
I think, like, that's fine, though. I actually, like, if your deck is linear and you've skimped on removal because you want to focus on your engine, you should pay a cost for that. So if you, like, can't answer Succubus, that's totally fine. That is the cost you paid for focusing on your proactive engine. It's okay for you to get blown out by that. And
I agree with that. I just thought we were talking about it being immune.
Yeah, and then, like, but conversely, if you do have the removal and you do care enough to interact, you should be paid off for, like, not caring about a 4-strength do-nothing card. So...
Yeah, I think we've kind of seen the immune tag before, right? It basically just used to be the color of your card, whether it's gold or not. And a lot of these answers that I'm seeing in chat, like Triss Butterfly Spell and a Swarm deck, Yennefer Conjurer. I mean, these are cards that were super strong back in the day, right? Because they were immune. And I think that kind of proves our point that you have to be really careful with where you put this tag on. But just a cool little thought experiment here. I can tell you guys what the worst card with the immune tag would be.
Go for it.
Canby?
I think you hit it.
Yeah.
But
I like the tag on Bork. I forget who had mentioned that. I wouldn't mind it on Bork at all. I think it'd be totally fine on Villain Trenton Mirth.
that was actually Berja, I think. He kind of is immune, right? I mean, like 13,
He's
like
very
10 with
hard
3
to
armor
kill.
is hard to kill. So
I
he's
think
kind of
that
like pseudo immune in
yeah.
that regard.
I think he's fine right now, where he is exceptionally difficult to kill, but
Mm-hmm.
not straight up unkillable. I think he's in a good spot.
Yeah, I'm actually a huge fan of Bork, and back when they changed him to 1 Scorch, I was up in arms against that. But I actually like where he is now. He's very playable, but not as kind of insane as he was before.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I was very resistant to the 2 Scorch change down to 1, but I think the play pattern around the card, all in all, is healthier now.
Yeah, the argument I've heard, which I'm inclined to agree with, is that it was just like too easy for the Borking player to set things up. Like, you could argue it's like, well, you could just like play around it and like not have the second Scorch matter, or like have them burn their own things, and that's just like not how that card ever played out. So like maybe you can make a world where it does, like the person who's getting borked has more agency over what the Scorches hit, but that just like wasn't really ever the case, so it makes sense.
Someone in chat is saying that Iris is worse with an immune tag. You're right.
Yeah, Iris is not great.
That's true.
Owned
Still
by
functions
chat
in the-
again.
The Arid Frost deck still works. You can still play her in Arid Frost.
Yeah, true. What do you guys think about Skellige? Let's kind of move on to that. We've seen kind of the biggest change to them is now that the veteran archetype is back. The clan veteran, or whatever the heck they call it now with its proper name, has the soldier tag again. So you can pull them with Freyas, you can pull them with Battle Maidens, you can do all this cool stuff with it. And now we're seeing that deck kind of take over the PTR for the early stages.
Well, it did. It was fun for the 5 days it lasted, but now it's dead again. According to Berza, they are going to change for the soldier tag, which I like. This is actually what spurred my like going on a redesign tangent and like seeing it was like, hey, you can actually change these cards without killing them, because yeah, veteran is very, very strong. And like the payoff is huge for enabling it, which is why instead of just legislating out of the game, you should make it so you have to do something to get that payoff. One of the ideas I had was like, say you have a Skellige unit on every row, and then you get to like, then it triggers. It doesn't trigger unless you have a Skellige unit. And that's just like one idea. There's a bunch of ways you can set that up. So you require the Skellige deck to do a thing, and then they get to play veteran, and then they get the payoff, and that makes it so that giant payoff is okay because your opponent had a window to interact with it. They had to do stuff to get it. There's actually like interplay going on, and like nothing's super overpowered. So I would have preferred if they moved in a direction similar to that instead of just saying this card's busted, kill it. Because
Yeah, there's so many different ways it could be handled rather than just removing. I feel like it's such a knee-jerk reaction just to put the tag back on and then take it off again within such short period of time with such small sample size. I like the idea the most, as you were describing, of making you jump through some hoops to get that payoff.
Yeah,
but
that's a really good idea.
Right? Even in a simpler world, though, can't you just make it so that one of the hoops you're jumping through, just off the top of my head, you make it 4 strength instead of 7 or 8, what it is. So you're paying a very real tempo cost to start this train rolling to get it down. Right? Like, you don't have to just take these decks out of the game. You make them pay a cost at one point in the game to reap the reward later. Like, you don't get a sweet fat body like me by eating healthy and stuff. I have to put cheeseburgers and beer into this thing to get this sweet body, right? Like, causation is very good in card games as well.
yeah, it's like the biggest problem across all of Gwent is nothing requires you to incur a cost for a payoff. All the payoffs are free. There's free of charge. You get your payoff for doing nothing. And that just makes it so, like, A, interaction doesn't matter, and B, the games aren't.
Right. I think at least when it comes to the strongest decks, that's pretty true. And I really like that idea, you know, where there's some sort of condition, you know, maybe 3 Skellige units on a row or something like that.
That was also coupled with like bringing back row locks and stuff. It was part of like a greater idea. But yeah, you need stuff going on.
Yeah, yeah. I guess the big question is if you do something like that where you lower the strength or lock it to a row, like is it then too weak? Or is it more of a problem with design space with veterans in general where, you know, you can never print a card like a Beastmaster, even something like the Hunter, archers, you know, are kind of busted with this veteran thing. You know, to play a little bit devil's advocate, I can see scenarios where just having this veteran ability, as it is now, kind of breaks other cards and makes it so that Skellige Bronze have to be a lot worse in order to balance this one card.
Well, you just have to, like, again, you just have to make it so the cost you are paying to get the benefit is, like, commiserate. Because, like, right now, you're free rolling all the extra points. You just play veterans in your deck, all of your stuff gets 1 point bigger. You did not incur costs to do this, it just happens. It's just, like, kind of a passive effect of your deck. In that case, yeah, it's nonsense. You're just free rolling all of these points. If those points are not a free roll, if you have to incur costs to try and get them, then, yeah, you should have a high ceiling on that if you get the payoff. Like, it should be very good.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, you have the downside of sometimes your opponent disrupts you, and you have all these, like, dead veterans in your hand that don't do anything. So that's, like, I would much rather see, like, going towards that, like, striving towards that pattern than just kind of writing things off. I don't think it's inherently busted. Obviously, if you had cards that, like, compounded it, that, like, spawned a copy or whatever, then it's getting a double benefit for the trigger.
Well,
but
you kind of have that, right? With Freya's? I mean, you kind of do have that.
Yeah, that's, like, part of the strengthening. Yeah, that's true. But I think that that's still, like, okay. I think that that's fine if you're, again, incurring costs for this benefit.
And I also think that Gwent has, in relation to your point, Shu, about designing cards in the future that could, you know, potentially make this too much, the developers for CDPR have shown the willingness to add a lot of tags and a lot of keywords, right? Like, they're not skimping on this. You can use these tags and keywords very judiciously to throw them around to really try and balance different factions, different archetypes, different things. And maybe we hit a point where there's too many and they don't want to put any more into the game, and, you know, how complex do you want your cards to look, things like that. But I do think that the amount of tags they've shown in the game can really keep this type of deck in check, should things go off the rails.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, someone in chat said you can have it where veteran is actually back to where it was a card tag that was on each individual card. So that way you can pick and choose and say, okay, you know, maybe the skirmishers, the clan skirmishers are fine to have veteran, but when we come to this Beastmaster over here, yeah, he's a little too strong. Let's yank it off him. And you're completely right. That way you can kind of pick and choose which pool of cards get these effects, and that makes it way easier to balance than if you just apply it as like a blanket to all faction cards or all, you know, even Tertiac is kind of a tag, but it's just very wide right now, I think.
I mean, you could, like, still design all the Tertiac cards. Again, like, I don't think any of the cards, like, really break. Like, they're all just normal rate cards that obviously if you free roll points on top of that, above rate cards. And it's, you just, like, you can't be a free roll. That's the problem is it's a free roll. You need to incur cost.
I think that's been a pretty common theme in a lot of the cards that we've talked about so far, are where you're just, you know, there's no better way to put it. You are just free rolling extra points. You're not incurring any cost, and you're getting a huge payoff, and, you know, everything's great, and then your opponent's doing it too, because that's what all the current playable cards do. And, you know, that's how you end up with giant point fiestas.
So, moving on to, I want to just go ahead and touch kind of these last two factions together. The monsters in Northern Realms, from the PTR so far, haven't seemed to gotten too much love. I mean, we see a few buffs here and there, things like Selkirk getting a point, Unseen Elder getting a point, but nothing really that's kind of reshaping these factions. What do you guys see coming from these two factions out of the gate?
I mean, Nilfgaard's still going to be all about Henselt, and Monsters is still going to be all about All and Consume, because nothing else changed. Although the Selkirk buff, like, is more than it seems, because 1 point on a dual creature is actually, like, 3, kind of.
Yeah, it's worth more than 1, I agree.
Yeah. It's like the math is weird, but it's like 3 point something. So that matters a lot. And I just think that there's really not, like, they didn't add any support for any other archetype, so, like, why would we see anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I've been waiting and waiting and waiting to see my beloved monsters mid-rangey decks get a little bit of an uptick. I feel like cards like Frost Dog, Jotun, Old Spear Tip, things like that are sort of relics of the past right now. I don't know if they just don't want to push these type of archetypes towards real levels of competition again, things like that. But if you just look at the numbers, when you're looking at 12 and 14 point bronzes being basically the standard and basically everywhere, and then you have something like a Frost Dog, which needs to be in play for 5 turns to accrue that type of value. Granted, there is a little bit of a benefit of the Frost beyond that, so you can't strictly compare points to come up with something accurate, but you're paying for your investment up front very heavily with tempo on cards like what's its actual name, Wild Hunt Hound, things like that, and you're not getting the payoff for a very long period of time. I like to see slight buffs to things like that. Yeah, I just like to see that archetype sort of come back to life. It's been down for quite some time now.
Yeah, the game's just in a spot where if you're interacting, you're doing it wrong, because it just doesn't matter.
I agree.
Yeah, even Northern Realms kind of has a lot of these same problems where even in the Henselt archetypes we see now dropping off like crazy, just because you have machines which are very powerful, but you still need setup with them. You need crewmen, you need targets to hit. Sometimes you need certain types of targets to hit, like a lot of the same number or something like that. And again, it just seems very costly to get value, which other cards are getting quite easily. Now, do we think that they'll kind of inherently get better just because some of these very strong bronze cards are getting buffed or nerfed in other factions, or do you think it's still maybe not enough?
Things will be a little bit more in line now, because like the ceiling on the format has been lowered. It should, if things go right, it should at least. So that makes it so these other decks are like more in line with it. So yeah, like on a raw point basis, like Henselt's been fine. It's one of the decks you're happy to bring to a tournament. It has like one of the stronger one card tempo plays in the game in Henselt that'll always have a plays. So I would like to see like other archetypes in Northern Realms. Like both monsters in Northern Realms have one viable archetype. That's not great, but if like that's their representation, if you want to play Northern Realms, you have a deck.
I think that the point gap closes, it shrinks, but I actually don't think it shakes up a whole lot, which is sort of a lot of what I think this patch is going to do. It's going to shrink the gap between the best decks and the, quote-unquote, almost their decks. And I do think it's going to help increase the general way that games play out. I think it's going to feel a little bit better, that we're not going to have a 5-minute mini game where I spam 3 Yavins at you and you throw 3 Cantarellas at me. Just getting rid of that whole nonsense before we can, sit down and actually play a game of Gwent. I think that's really nice. So I think it's going to become closer, but I expect the meta to stay largely the same. Slightly better play patterns and closing the gap between the best decks and the not best decks. But yeah, I think Henselt is particularly going to be fine. I think Henselt's much better as a tournament-style deck when, particularly the bigger tournaments, where you can guarantee yourself the good side of the coin. Also, that deck's very high-rolly. It performs wildly different when it has a Ronvid and when it doesn't have a Ronvid, as there's not a ton of other super playable crewmen that you want to just open the game up on. But yeah.
It's interesting too because I guess kind of some more of the frontrunner decks in these two factions, like the Armor Radovid type list and Eridan Moonlight. I mean, those two decks kind of leaned very heavily on Siri Nova, which also actually got a little bit of a point decrease in the PTR, down from 25 points to 22 points if you meet the condition. And some people call this a buff, but I'm still thinking it's mostly a nerf. But it'll be interesting to see how these kind of second-tier decks in second-tier factions are affected by this. What do you guys think about that?
I've come around to it being a nerf. I originally was saying it was a buff, and if they nerfed it to 20, obviously be a buff. But 3 points is like a lot. Although it's not a lot. Like if
it's not a huge nerf.
Yeah, it's still a fair payoff for incurring the cost Siri Nova requires you to pay. But it seems like a weird card to de-emphasize because it was the cool like deck building puzzle for the game. It was a unique thing. It created a bunch of archetypes across different factions, and like it was just an interesting card, and it didn't really seem like problematically powerful. Like it's 5 points stronger than like the other payoff cards. It's like fine, it gets ignied, it gets scorched, whatever. And to nerf that card, after we played, you made a card that was supposed to be cool and interesting and get people to play it, and then we played it, and then you nerf it. Like it wasn't problematic. Like SereNova's win rate was not like exceptional. It wasn't oppressive in any way, shape, or form. The only metric by which you could say that it was out of line was play rate, but it was played in like several different factions for different decks. So I'm really not sure why it got tagged. It doesn't make a great deal of sense to me. And you could certainly debate that the payoff is no longer worth it for making a SereNova deck, but it just sucks that that's like a thing that they're de-emphasizing a lot.
Yeah, this is the change I'm probably the saddest about altogether. I think at 24 points, it's very close to just like a straight up buff across the board. I think 25 is kind of the sweet spot because it had the interaction. 22 is significantly less, and the reason why is you have to compare its function, right? So you want to look at what are the other finishers, the big one-card finishers, right? So something like Rain Farm into Joaquin into potentially Nausicaa Brigade, something like that. Like, how does it stack up against that? I believe that's actually 23 points. The points don't really matter. A lot of games, it doesn't matter whether it's, a 20 or a 500. It's all just in relation into the other finishers. And I don't know if 22 is going to be in the sweet spot. It depends what other finishers are currently being run. So I think that's where you keep an eye on it. But I don't know. I'm sort of in Truedawn's camp here. I don't think the change was warranted. I don't think it was necessary. I like the interesting counterplay of, like, holding on to your Igni just in case, and then if someone, 4,000 IQs you, they mulligan away their Siri, you're stuck with a dumb 5-card gold for the end of the round. You get wrecked. Like, it promoted some really interesting mind games and things like that. So I liked it better before, but I still think the card will see play.
Yeah, I don't really mind this nerf too much. I think, again, Nova was kind of one of those swing cards that we kind of touched on a little bit earlier. If you're in the mirror, a lot comes down to really, do you just draw a SereNova or don't you? And even not in mirrors, like if you're playing like Brand Nova and you don't find that SereNova, like you're in big trouble against a lot of decks depending on the situation. So I'd like to see that a little bit de-emphasized in the game, which they kind of have been. Again, it's fine if you have some sort of cost to it, which Nova does, but the cost for Nova really isn't that big. I mean, especially in the state of the game now.
Well, it's not that big because a lot of factions have poorly designed Brawn bases that are just piles of points. So it does,
Right.
like, Scoia'tael is the perfect example. Like, all their bronzes don't have text; they're just points. So it doesn't matter that you run 2 of each because they're all the same card.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
Like that's a problem with the design of those factions, not SereNova.
That's how ShoePlays was able to succeed, because it just didn't matter. And you can also, especially when there was, create spies, you could get yourself into a scenario where your bronzes could all be just 0 points and it wouldn't matter for the entirety of round 2. Like, it just...
Right, yeah.
That was an interesting deck.
Yeah, I think as long as they can balance it out where the deck building cost is great enough to actually, make it fair that you're getting this huge kind of play, then that's fine. But which I think they are doing again with kind of the nerfs to bronze and things like that. But again, it just feels really bad when you have a 1-card deck kind of, and you have to rely on drawing it or playing it. So I don't mind it so much in that regard that it's getting nerfed.
Would you go on if you had another.
I was just gonna say, like, I understand the feel bad, like they last play SereNova and you couldn't do anything about it thing, and like that's a feel bad moment because you can't do anything about it. Like, you don't have a play left. But again, that's more symptomatic of like last play mattering so much more so than SereNova mattering so much, and also the fact that last say is often determined by coin flip, not things that take place during the game or like who drew their spy. So I think if you made last say like determined more so by player agency, things like that would be less frustrating. People would be more amenable to high impact finishers like SereNova.
Yeah, I think that's completely right too. I mean, Nova is just, again, when you have the coin flip, it makes that card a lot more volatile. you know, where you kind of have two extremes. Either you draw it with last say, you play it, you know, maybe they have last say, so it gets igni. So I think that's a big part of it as well. I completely agree.
Yeah, like 22 points when you look at it isn't even good for a gold in a lot of positions. The only real thing it has going for it is that it's a single card, you know, no setup, doesn't need a long round, doesn't need any other condition. You can just kind of smack it down. You know, like in a round one, even a nerfed Iflin is going to get a lot more points than 22. So it's not just on rate; it's about like its function as the round 3 finisher. I think for the most part.
Yeah. I think 22, now that a lot of other golds have gotten fairly nerfed, I think 22 is probably fine for now.
What do you guys, where are you all on the changes with the spies? How are you liking it so far?
Good.
It's like, it's better. You still, like, on a fundamental basis, spies still encourage the interaction, like this binary interaction where I'm going to play a spy, and the only thing in the game that counters my spy is your spy. And if you don't have it, I get an edge, and there's nothing about it. And, like, it doesn't matter how many spies we're playing, that interaction is always going to exist with this incarnation of spies. So, like, yeah, we're not, like, it's not diluting the variance anymore with, like, summoning circles and all of that stuff. But you still have this, like, really horrible gameplay pattern of, here is this thing, do you have your one thing that answers it? Okay, no, cool. So I would, like, spies need to be reworked in some fashion. I've had the idea of potentially making it so they only trigger if you are still ahead after it resolves. So you, like, you do not counter the spy with another spy, and it also encourages what I was talking about before, like being able to get paid off for getting very proud of your opponent, stuff like that. But in any case, like, that binary interaction is just uninteresting and annoying.
That's kind of interesting. If it wouldn't trigger unless you were ahead. Because then also it makes it so that if you're the guy going second, like in round 1, you're kind of locked out of your spy almost for that round, right?
Yeah, and it makes it so going second is, like, worse and lines it up more with going first.
Yeah. That's interesting. I might have to think about that, but that sounds like a cool idea. Just from first thought.
There's some implementation issues where, like, when it should trigger, because if you just have it straight up, like, headwind battlefield, like, do your thing, it ignores weather, which is an important part of various decks, so that, like, that doesn't feel exactly right. So, like, if you're, like, gonna implement this card, there's, like, weird technical things, but, like, something like that I think is worth exploring.
It's cool too, because, like, if you do go second and you win that first round, you can still play the spy, right? Because you're going first in the second round.
Yeah.
So, and it makes you have to think about it more, right? You can't just slam it down. You kind of have to think, okay, will I be ahead? Like, if I hold on to it now, will I be able to get ahead later? Things like that.
You makes it so spies are, like, interacted with via managing the point gap and not just did I draw my spy.
Yeah. That's cool.
I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out. I definitely think there's something to your point about it being very binary. I mean, yeah, in general, I dislike binary things, right? Like, when you get droughted, it's all about, well, do I have my weather clear or not? Otherwise, I'm likely just very, very dead here, because there's only, like, 1 point of interaction for stuff like that. That being said, I am looking forward to seeing how it plays out. The only thing that really worries me is Broover into Spy, Rainfarn into Spy, him into Scal into Spy, like, the super cheap Spy interactions, the ways to effectively reduce the points as the turn you play it. I think that's going to, how that winds up working out, that I'm really, really nervous about. I definitely think it's a step in the right direction, but yeah, I don't know. I guess I haven't really thought about any of the potential changes you were talking about. I'd have to give that a good think.
And for those who don't know, spies now have a timer on them, but it's not really a timer. It's like a charge. So, like, when you play the spy, the timer goes away and it can't trigger. Like, it doesn't matter what you do to it. It can no longer.
Right. A bit weird with that. It's kind of strange.
It's unclear. But... yeah, it's not, like, the greatest template, but
as long as it serves its function, right? You can't mirror it. You can't summoning circle it. Milva, they won't get to play. It's just like nothing, and nothing works. And you know, you get your one, and that's it. Everybody gets one, like Spider-Man, dude. I've
had multiple people, like, resurrect by spy in their graveyard because they're no longer doomed because they don't need to be, and they didn't get it. So.
So I think we're about an hour in. I want to go ahead and open up the chat to some viewer questions for the last 10 minutes or so. So go ahead and ask in the chat if you would like a question. You could add us at Topdeck Gwent. Real quick, while those are coming in, I would like to say I think it'd be cool if they added some more card advantage cards that weren't a spy. Things like Akvis, Siri. I think there's a lot of design space in that where you can kind of design cool, I guess, triggers for those or abilities that can give you card advantage, and that would be cool to play around with that. But again, hard to make those in balance, but something I'd like to see.
They're super tough to balance, but I agree. Old Kieran was probably my favorite card ever made. The old ambush Siri type of card.
Oh yeah.
I thought that card was fine.
Like that. I thought it was fine as well.
Yeah, because like you get the card, but you have to mulligan it away, or the card you got is a 1.
Yep.
So like there was a real cost to that card because you have this 1-point card in your deck. Like you get punished by that very easily. So yeah, I thought that card was cool. I like the idea of having more ways to get card advantage because that's more ways to flip the coin and makes the coin flip matter less. And when you have them coming from different angles, like Octus punishes you for not having removal, Siri punishes you for for dilly-dallying and not keeping up on the point gap. Like if you have it for all these different things and like you have to consider all of this stuff and like kind of take like ask like, okay, what thing are they running? What should I play around? All of that like fosters like reasonably compelling gameplay and isn't making everything binary. So I agree. I like that. I would want them to do it through different though.
So we have an interesting question here from Pinata Full of Rapiers. Do you think the play rate of cards alone is ever good justification for nerfing those cards? I think ever is very, very strong, right? If something's in 90% of decks, then it's obviously terrible. I, in generally, don't think so, but I think usually if something's play rate is obscenely high, it's because something else is wrong with the card, and that's the reason it's seeing those sort of play rates. The closest I ever personally came to feeling something like that was back in the old when Hjalmar was very, very good, and Renew was in like basically every deck, right? Renew was in almost every deck because it was, I'm going to use my faction's most busted gold, and then just do that twice. You're going to have to beat it twice, and if you can't beat it twice, I'm going to win the game because 2 rounds is GG. So I think Renew was sort of along that list. It's a really interesting question. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's not inherently problematic. It depends greatly on the card about. So, for example, there are certain cards within each faction that are the bedrock of that faction. They're supposed to be played a lot. It's how the faction functions and makes it distinct. Priestess of Freya is a good example. Emissary, like those cards are going to be very heavily played because they're emblematic of what that faction does and is good at. They're supposed to be played a lot. So you wouldn't ban Priestess of Freya for having 100% play rate in Skellige. That would be nonsense. Similarly, like Renew or Restore, literally every time I get it wrong. Literally every time. But Restore is a card that like is emblematic of what Skellige is supposed to do. You could argue about power level, it was probably too strong, but like it was played in every Skellige deck intentionally. Like it was designed that way. Every card in Skellige synergizes well with Restore. It's supposed to be that way. You don't nerf that card because it's played too much. Siri Nova, neutral cards in general, they're bigger red flags when they're played ubiquitously. Like we saw like Gold Weather through periods being played ubiquitously. That was problematic. Siri was like 100% play rate in the game when she was like 8 points or whatever. Like that, when that's happening, then yeah, you have to evaluate if like what like if those cards should be at that rate or why not. But by and large, there's a lot of cards that are supposed to be played highly. Like you want people to play with your cards if they're emblematic of the theme of that set or how the faction functions. Then yeah, they're supposed to be played highly. That's why I didn't really agree with the Siri Nova change, because it was one of the hallmark cards of the new set. It like can go in a bunch of different factions and for like different reasons. Like in the Skellige Siri Nova deck is much different than the Squirtle Siri Nova deck, or at least like would optimally be if the bronzes were designed well. But like it's making different archetypes and it's supposed to be played a lot. Like you made this card so people could do the thing and play with it. So you have to evaluate like why it's overplayed. If it's overplayed on because it's just too strong and it's wrong to not run it, then yeah, you should probably change that card. If it's being played a lot because you asked people to fix this, like to figure out this deck building puzzle, or it's core to how the faction functions, then that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, just like with all data, it can give you lots of good ideas and kind of understanding on what's happening. But you can't just look at the data and take it face value. You have to be really careful how you kind of, interpret it and things like that. And, there's a lot of different things where it's like correlation versus causation, maybe this card is good, or maybe it's played a lot because it's synergized really well with this other card that is busted or something like that. So I don't think it's necessarily bad or a good justification nerfing cards just based on play rate, but I think you have to be very careful and look at the other factors and make sure that you're nerfing it for a real reason, not just the play rate. But the reason usually causes the play rate to skyrocket.
Exactly. Like, why is this card seeing such high play rate? Answering that question is going to give you the answer of whether it needs a change or not, I believe.
It's also important to acknowledge that it's okay for some cards to be very underplayed. Like, it's okay for Avaloq the Sage to not be played a lot. It's okay for Phil Vengel.
It's okay for Avaloq to not be played a lot either.
Yeah, any Avaloq. Avaloqs of any kind.
Just get rid of that guy, man.
So here's a good one. Shadow Chick asked, how do you feel about CDPR encouraging graveyard interaction in all factions now? We see cards like Ointment, cards like Pauline, Sky Tall. What do you guys think?
It's good and bad, because the bad part is that it takes away the faction identity of Skellige. Like, Skellige's identity was rezzing things. That's what it did, like, better than everyone else, or just like did and nothing else did. And like, that was core to its identity, and putting that in other factions dilutes its identity and makes everything look homogenous and erodes the flavor of the game, which is like a very real cost. The upside is that having the graveyard be an additional resource gives players additional options, like to do certain things. Like Sigdrifa is kind of a modal card. It can be a variety of different things, although usually you have a specific target in mind, but you can still get a wide array of things. Like, you have choices. So whenever you have stuff like that, you are giving more options to the player, in this case usually resulting in more decisions. So you have to decide whether the erosion of faction identity is worth the perceived gains in gameplay. So I'm not sold that it is in this case, but I'm not like so far one or the other that I'm here for the debate.
Yeah, I think that this is part of a deeper question that is certainly something we're going to be covering on future episodes. One of the things with Gwent is that the resource system is so heavily invested in just the cards in your hand. So having additional ways to utilize resources, additional zones that matter, that aren't just your hand and the board, can be very, very good design space. I'm of the opinion that, some factions should be better at it than others, right? Maybe Skellige has the more powerful ways to utilize their graveyard, while Nilfgaard's doing this slightly better than the other faction. I don't necessarily mind increasing the interaction with different zones in the game and using them as resources, but I also don't like that it erodes away the identity. I think certain factions can be stronger at it than others, but in general, I really like the idea of trying to min-max the most out of the few available resources that a game like Gwent has.
Yeah, I think faction and kind of more specifically like deck identity is really important, but not so much because of, dumb reasons like lore or anything like that. It's really important to have identity, because if you have all decks that can do similar things, like if you have a consume deck in every faction, right? People are just going to find the best consume deck and just play that one, and all the other ones don't get played, right? Because there's one that's strictly superior. Like, it just happens. Yeah. So I think if you want to promote deck diversity on a whole in the game, you need to make decks do different things, right? Like, Nilfgaard can only do Reveal. So if you want to play Reveal, you go play Nilfgaard, right? And again, you have to make sure it's balanced, but it's a way of promoting deck diversity. I like what Truedawn says about the graveyard being a resource. I think there's different ways that they can kind of tap that resource without making just straight reses in every faction. Cards like a Sire are great, put things into your deck. Cards like Ghoul are really good because you're consuming cards from your graveyard, and a lot of consume cards, again, pick cards from your graveyard for points or maybe for thinning in the case of Slizzard. So I really like them kind of trying to come up with some more creative ways to kind of tap this resource of a graveyard.
Yeah. I think Ghoul's the perfect example, like you just said. That's Monster's way of interacting with Graveyard, right? It's getting some raw points out of it. You had to do some work, theoretically, to get something in there, even going as far as, in some cases, playing Manticore, but you're not just bringing the unit back. Like, Skellige would be able to bring that 13-strength unit back and get the ability of it and all of that. Yeah. I think Ghoul's a great example of proper ways for other factions to use graveyards, where Poly less so.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you can have every faction do things with the graveyard, but you can make them all distinct. Like Monster consumes stuff, Skelliger reses stuff, Squirtle can only res spells, like Nilfgaard does whatever. But like the big oversteps, the big oversteps are Polly and the Poultice, because those are just like straight res creature, like direct overlap with what Skellige does.
The ointment, right? Sorry.
Yeah, wait. Yeah. Didn't it used to be called Poultice? Is that a different card? Whatever.
The name change, I don't know. It may have. I think you might be right.
Who cares? Who cares about alchemy cards? But anyway, like those, like they don't have a distinct function. Those are just like direct overlaps of what Skellige is supposed to be able to do. So those cards I don't like. But if you want to have every faction be able to interact with the graveyard through their own distinct way, then you're getting the best of both worlds, where you're not eroding faction identity and you are allowing the graveyard to be a resource for every faction.
Right. I think we can all agree with that. Yeah. I think that would be about time for the podcast. We're around an hour. Real quick, before we hand off for some plugs, I just want to say thank you guys all for watching. We'll be here every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, streaming live. If you missed some of the show, don't worry. It'll be over on the Topdeck YouTube account for you to enjoy. And yeah, I really enjoyed having you on. Truedawn, Joe, thank you. Why don't we go ahead and give you guys an opportunity to hit some plugs, tell us where we can find you and all that. Go ahead, Truedawn.
Oh, well, like I said at the beginning, my name is Truedawn. I stream on Twitch every weekday at 9 a.m. Eastern. Mainly Gwent, but other card games as well. In the current state of Gwent. Yeah,
you came from Magic, also, right?
Yes, so, Magic was my origin. We're definitely playing a bunch of MTG Arena when that comes out. And I also produce content for Topdeck. Started doing videos. Just put up a video of my review on the patch. One of a lot of the things I went over here. It's more design focused, as is most of my commentary. And I would appreciate it if you checked any of that out. And thank you guys for watching. And you can Joe.
Yeah, I'm JoeSn0w. The best way to find me, get in touch with me, is directly at my Twitch, Monday through Friday, start around noon Eastern Standard Time. Twitch.tv/JoeSn0w. The last O in snow is a 0. Stop by, hang out, shoot the shit, ask me some questions. I try and interact with my chat as much as possible, so it's always probably the best avenue to get in touch with me. Other than that, you can find me later this month at the Wild Hunt Tournament, North America's first LAN live tournament event. It is open. I believe we do still have a few registration spots available. If you want to sign up for the tournament, you definitely should. It's going to be a blowout. It's going to be awesome. Come check it out. Have a blast with a lot of your favorite Gwent personalities from NA. A lot of big names going. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Awesome.
I'm making the 4-hour drive.
Very nice, very nice.
The savage wasteland to Philadelphia. Worst thing ever. They put Cheese Whiz on steak and think it's like a reasonable thing to do.
You know, I tried it when I was in Philly this weekend, and it was not bad, I have to say. It felt weird ordering it, but it tasted delicious.
You got indoctrinated. Like,
yeah.
It's just like straight up Cheese Whiz. It's just like the kind of Cheese Whiz you find at like a gas station, and they just put it on steak.
In the can, right? The aerosol can. I guess for my plug, I'll just say, yeah, go ahead, sign up for the NA Wild Hunt Tournament. If you guys saw the hype stream that we did the other day over on JoeSn0w's channel, I mean, that's pretty much what you can expect. You'll be hanging out with a bunch of great guys in the Gwent community, having a lot of fun, and playing a lot of Gwent. So go check that out. As for me, you can find me mostly on Twitter, at ShoePlays. Feel free to hit me up anytime. And yeah, that'll be it. I'd like to thank Topdeck. Go check out all the other great content we have, like the Thursday talk show with Swim and Jagras. Another great show there. And
that's 4 p.m. every Thursday Eastern Standard Time, correct?
Right. It's their talk show Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern. Ours is Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern. So double the talk shows for you guys. It's awesome. But anyway, once again, thank you guys all for watching, and we will see you next week.
Later, everybody.